coastal erosion. 39. The mangrove system in Everglades National Park is the largest continuous system of mangroves in the world. 40. Manatees inhabit shallow water around mangroves. Within the Florida mangrove systems live 220 species of fish, and a variety of crabs, crayfish, shrimp, mollusks, and other invertebrates, which serve as the main source of food for many birds. 41. Dozens of bird species use mangroves as nurseries and food stores, including pelicans, grebes, tricolored herons, Egretta tricolor, gulls, terns, hawks and kites, and arboreal birds like mangrove cuckoos, Cossus minor, yellow warblers, Dendroica petechia, and white-crowned pigeons, Patagioenus leucocephala. 42. The mangroves also support 24 species of amphibians and reptiles and 18 species of mammals, including the endangered green turtle, Chlania midas, hawksbill turtle, Eretmochellas imbricata, and West Indian manatee, Trichechus manatus. 43. Coastal lowlands. Coastal lowlands, or wet prairies, are saltwater marshes that absorb marine water when it gets high or fresh water when rains are heavy. Floods occur during hurricane and tropical storm surges when ocean water can rise several feet over the land. 44. Heavy wet seasons also cause floods when rain from the north flows into the Everglades. Few trees can survive in the conditions of this region, but plants succulents like saltwort and glasswort tolerate salt, brackish water, and desert conditions. Animal life in this zone is dependent upon the amount of water present, but commonly found animals include Cape Sable seaside sparrow, Amadramus maritimus mirabilis, Everglades snail kite, Rostramus sociabilis, wood stork, Mycteria americana, eastern indigo snake, Drymarchum cupri, and small mammals such as rats, mice, and rabbits. 45. Marine and estuary. Mangroves reduce coastal erosion and shelter wildlife. The largest body of water within the park is Florida Bay, which extends from mangrove swamps of the mainland's southern tip to the Florida Keys. Over 800 square miles, 2,100 square kilometers, of marine ecosystem lies in this range. Coral sponges and seagrasses serve as shelter and food for crustaceans and mollusks, which in turn are the primary food source for larger marine animals. Sharks, stingrays, and barracudas also live in this ecosystem. Pelicans, shorebirds, terns, and black skimmers, Ryncops niger, are among the birds frequenting park shorelines. 46. The bay also has its own resident population of bottlenose dolphin, Tertius truncatus. 47. The bay's many basins are broken up by sandbanks that serve as plentiful recreational fishing grounds for snook, Centropomus undecimalis, redfish, Cynopsocellatus, spotted sea trout, Cynocium nebulosius, tarpon, Megaflux atlanticus, bonefish, Albula vulpes, and permit, Trichinus. Falcatus. 48, as well as snapper, Lutinus campechanus, bluegill, Lepomis macrochirus, and bass. 49, wading birds such as roseate spoonbills, Plataliagiga, reddish egrets, Egretta rufescens, and great white herons, R.D. Herodias occidentalis, have unique subpopulations that are largely restricted to Florida Bay. 50. Other bird species include bald eagles, cormorants, and ospreys. Mammals along the shoreline include raccoons, opossums, bobcats, and fox squirrels. 51. Human history. Native peoples. A Calusa Chickee at the Florida Museum of Natural History. Humans likely first inhabited the South Florida region 10,000 to 20,000 years ago. 52. Two tribes of Native Americans developed on the peninsula's southern tip. The Tequesta lived on the eastern side and the Calusa, greater in numbers, on the western side. The Everglades served as a natural boundary between them. The Tequesta lived in a single large community near the mouth of the Miami River, while the Calusa lived in 30 villages. Both groups traveled through the Everglades but rarely lived within them, remaining mostly along the coast. 52. The diets of both groups consisted mostly of shellfish and fish, small mammals, game, and wild plants. Having access only to soft limestone, most of the tools fashioned by Native Americans in the region were made of shell bone, wood, and animal teeth. Shark teeth were used as cutting blades. 53. And sharpened reeds became arrows and spears. 54. Shell mounds still exist today within the park, giving archaeologists and anthropologists evidence of the raw materials available to the indigenous people for tool construction. Spanish explorers estimated the number of Tequesta at first contact to be around 800, and Calusa at 2,000. The National Park Service reports there were probably about 20,000 natives living in or near the Everglades when the Spanish established contact in the late 16th century. 55. The Calusa lived in social strata and were able to create canals, earthworks, and shell works. The Calusa were also able to resist Spanish attempts at conquest. 53. The Spanish had contact with these societies and established missions further north, near Lake Okeechobee. In the 18th century, invading Creeks incorporated the dwindling numbers of the Tequesta into their own. Neither the Tequesta nor Calusa tribe existed by 1800. 56. Disease, warfare, and capture for slavery were the reasons for the eradication of both groups. The only evidence of their existence within the park boundaries is a series of shell mounds that were built by the Calusa. 57. In the early 19th century, Creeks, escaped African slaves, and other Indians from northern Florida displaced by the Creek War, formed the area's Seminole Nation. After the end of the Seminole Wars in 1842, the Seminoles faced relocation to Indian Territory near Oklahoma. A few hundred Seminole hunters and scouts settled within what is today Big Cypress National Preserve, to escape the forced emigration to the west. 58. From 1859 to about 1930, the Seminoles and Miccosukee, a similar but linguistically unique tribe, lived in relative isolation, making their living butchering. In 1928, surveying and construction began on the Tamiami Trail, along the northern border of Everglades National Park. The road bisected the Everglades, introducing a steady, if small, traffic of white settlers into the Everglades. 59. Some members of the Miccosukee and Seminole tribes continue to live within park boundaries. Management of the park includes approval of new policies and procedures by tribal representatives in such a manner that they do not conflict with the park purpose. 60. American settlements. Following the end of the Seminole Wars, Americans began settling at isolated points along the coast in what is now Park, from the 10,000 Islands to Cape Sable. Communities developed on the two largest pieces of dry ground in the area, on Chokoloskee Island and at Flamingo on Cape Sable, both of which established post offices in early 1890s. 61. Chokoloskee Island is a shell mound, a midden built roughly 20 feet, 6 m, high over thousands of years of occupation by the Calusa. The settlements in Chokoloskee and Flamingo served as trading centers for small populations of farmers, fishermen, and charcoal burners settled in the 10,000 islands. Both settlements and the more isolated homesteads could only be reached by boat until well into the 20th century. Everglades City, on the mainland near Chokoloskee, enjoyed a brief period of prosperity when, beginning in 1920, it served as the headquarters for the construction of the Tamiami Trail. A dirt road from Florida City reached Flamingo in 1922, while a causeway finally connected Chokoloskee to the mainland's Everglades City in 1956. 62, 63, after the parkway's established, private property in the Flamingo area was claimed by eminent domain, and the site was incorporated in Toth Park as a visitor center. 61. Land development and conservation. A canal lock being constructed in the Everglades in 1906. Several attempts were made to drain and develop the Everglades in the 1880s. The first canals built in the Everglades did little harm to the ecosystem, as they were unable to drain much of it. 64. Napoleon Bonaparte Broward based the majority of his 1904 campaign for governor on how drainage would create the empire of the Everglades. 65. Broward ordered the drainage that took place between 1905 and 1910, and it was successful enough that land developers sold tracts for $30 per acre, settling the town of Davie, and developing regions in Lee and Dade counties. The canals also cleared water that made way for agricultural fields growing sugarcane. 66, 67, in the 1920s, a population boom in South Florida created the Florida land boom, which was described by author Michael Grunwald as insanity. 68, land was sold before any homes or structures were built on it, and in some cases before any plans for construction were in place. New landowners, eager to make good on their investments, hastily constructed homes and small towns on recently drained land. Mangrove trees on the coasts were taken down for better views and replaced with shallow-rooted palm trees. The U.S. Army Corps of Engineers began construction in larger canals to control the rising waters in the Everglades. Nevertheless, Lake Okeechobee continued to rise and fall. The region was covered with rain, and city planners continued to battle the water. The 1926 Miami hurricane caused Lake Okeechobee levees to fail. Hundreds of people south of the lake drowned. 2 years later, the 1928 Okeechobee hurricane claimed 2,500 lives when Lake Okeechobee once again surged over its levees. Politicians who declared the Everglades uninhabitable were silenced when a 4-story wall, the Herbert Hoover Dike, was built around Lake Okeechobee. This wall effectively cut off the water source from the Everglades. 69. Following the wall's construction, South Florida endured a drought severe enough to cause serious wildfires in 1939. The influx of humans had a detrimental effect on the plants and animals of the region when Melaleuca trees, Melaleuca quinquenervia, were introduced to help with drainage, along with Australian pines brought in by developers as windbreaks. The region's timber was devastated for lumber supplies. Alligators, birds, frogs, and fish were hunted on a large scale. Entire rookeries of wading birds were shot to collect their plumes, which were used in women's hats in the early 20th century. 70. The largest impact people had on the region was the diversion of water away from the Everglades. Canals were deepened and widened, and water levels fell dramatically, causing chaos in food webs. 71. Salt water replaced fresh water in the canals, and by 1997 scientists noticed that salt water was seeping into the Bispine Aquifer, South Florida's water source. 72. In the 1940s, Marjorie Stoneman Douglas, a freelance writer and former reporter for the Miami Herald, began to search the Everglades for an assignment about the Miami River. She studied the land and water for 5 years and published The Everglades, River of Grass in 1947, describing the area in great detail, including a chapter on its disappearance. She wrote, "What had been a river of grass and sweet water that had given meaning and life and uniqueness to this enormous geography through centuries in which man had no place here was made, in one chaotic gesture of greed and ignorance and folly, a river of fire." 73. The book has sold 500,000 copies since its publication, and Douglas's continued dedication to ecology conservation earned her the nicknames Grand Dame of the Everglades. grandmother of the Everglades and the Antichrist for her singular focus at the expense of some political interests. 74. She founded and served as president for an organization called Friends of the Everglades, initially intended to protest the construction of a proposed Big Cypress jetport in 1968. Successful in that confrontation, the organization has grown to over 4,000 members, committed to the preservation of the Everglades. 75. She wrote and spoke about the importance of the Everglades until her death at age